Podcasting from Ocala, Florida, the horse capital of the world, this is Parables, Life Lessons from a Horse. And I am your host, Kat Chrysostom, founder and owner of Benefab, author of Broken to Branded, and most importantly, an animal advocate and a positive leader. This is a podcast showing how love, connection, and trust translate into leadership and how horses have led me into becoming a better leader for myself and in my business. I'm so glad you've joined us. Now, let's learn something new and have a little fun, shall we? Welcome, everybody. We have another really fun episode with some exciting things to cover. Today, we are going to be talking about creativity. And I have a creative writer and author. She's a best-selling author that's going to be joining us here in just a few minutes. I'm really excited to introduce her to you. She has got some amazing things in store for you and for me, honestly. Through these interviews, I always learn something new, and it's always really just fun to be able to kind of stimulate that creativity in our own minds and be learning new things. With that, I did want to tell you what happened with Para and I sort of really over the course of the past year. I always try to be consistent, and you by now know that Para and I have a great relationship. I love him. I look forward to seeing him every day that I'm in town and home. I can't wait to get out to the barn in the evenings and be able to work with him, or I should say play with him. But one of the things that I have found is that consistency is an amazing tool for teaching. Consistency is where everything starts. If we're not consistent, and we see the same thing with children and with our dogs and anything that we're training, even ourselves. If we get out of a routine and we lack consistency, we are not going to progress. That's just not going to happen, at least at perhaps the rate that we want. So one thing that I found with Para is consistency is great, but boredom pretty quickly sets in. And it's the same thing with me too. I love to practice yoga. A lot of people love to work out. I'm not huge on working out. I suppose some people would call yoga working out. But I don't do the same yoga flows and routines every day. But a lot of people do the same thing every day with whether it's their horse or their dog. Sit, look, come, back up. Whatever it is, they do the same thing. And that consistency is good, but the animals get really bored with it. So Para has taught me to really get creative. So I might be doing all of these, things, whether that is backing, him up, moving him away off of, my cues, sideways, forward, jumping, doing all sorts of things. But maybe one day I do them in a different flow. The next day I do them in that same flow backwards, or, I do them in a rectangular small paddock, and then I move to a round pen, and then I move all over the property. I take him trail riding and, work under saddle on those things. But the point is that variety and, is very important, and variety comes from becoming creative. So I really encourage you guys to look at your own life. If you have an animal life, a horse life, look at what you do with your animals and think, am I being consistent enough for my animals or myself to learn, but also creative enough to keep it interesting? So I am going to jump right into the expert on this and go ahead and introduce to you her right now. Kade is a creativity coach, award-winning independent author, horse owner, and the host of an Equestrian Author Spotlight Podcast. She helps fellow equine authors build, grow, and expand their author careers. Creating writing makes her spurs jingle. In the Reins, the first in Carly's series of novels inspired by the equestrian lifestyle, has been on Amazon bestseller for more than 10 weeks, is an Equus Film Festival Literary Award winner for Best Western Fiction, and has earned 2 Feathered Quill Book Awards in the Romance and Adult Book featuring animal categories. The In the Reins book series was written with her horse lovers in mind, no matter which discipline they ride. And the horses are as vital to moving the story forward as the human characters are. The books are perfect for poolside reading or taking to the beach. I am really excited for you to be joining us, Carly. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on the show. I just love connecting with and talking with fellow horse lovers. It's my favorite.
Me too. Me too. We could talk for hours, I'm sure. So Carly, tell me, how did you decide to be an equestrian author and creative writer?
Well, it's such an interesting story. If I look back on my life, there's always been 2 constants, and that's always been horses and creative writing. When I was a young girl, I loved creative writing classes. I was always in like honors English courses, but I never really saw myself as an author until one day. I always thought myself maybe more of a poet until one day. I always carry a journal with me, and one day my main character, McKinnon Kelly, came to me in the form of a poem. And I was like, who's this handsome cowboy? Where did he come from? So I jotted down the poem, which actually became the intro to In the Reins. And then a few days later, the entire end of the book just kind of completely flowed out of me. And I was writing furiously. I wrote it all down. And I was like, okay, what is going on here? I've got an intro and I have an ending. And then, I kind of put it to the side. I didn't really think a whole lot of it. But the story, and I believe this is my muse, just showing up and saying, hey, this is what you have to do. The story just would not leave me alone. So I finally sat down and I committed to trying to tell this story. And, once I did, it just sort of flowed out of me. And here it is today, an award-winning book. And it just kind of came from nowhere. And I love it.
Wow. How long did that process take?
Well, that's the interesting thing about first books. Like I said, I never set out to be an author. So first books are always kind of challenging because you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. Am I good enough to put my work out into the world? How do I do this? So that book actually started and stopped a lot for me. Like I would work on it and then I'd put it in a drawer. And then I'd take it back out and I'd work on it when the characters were telling me they needed me to write something down. And so basically it took me about 5 years to get that book written because there was so much anxiety and fear and overwhelm and am I good enough? And then one day I took it out of my drawer and I gave it to my husband and I said, will you read, the first 5 chapters of this and tell me if I have something, if I should keep working on this because I feel like I should, but I'm not sure. And something about my husband is he's not a reader. The only book series I think I've ever seen him read was The Hunger Games on our honeymoon. So, this is big. So, so he read the 5 chapters and, out loud to me, which was nice to hear it out loud and laughing and he was smiling. And when he finished reading those chapters, he put it down in his lap and he said, Carly, this is really good. You have to keep going. And so that was the moment that I really got focused and I really sat down and I did the work and finished the book. And I'm glad I did.
Oh, wow. That's a great story too. Cause I always like to, you said you were kind of frustrated and just felt like anxious about it. And I think that that's one thing, especially for our listeners, like all of us have been there. I know a couple of years ago, I was at a place in my business where some pretty big things were, changing. And I felt like, oh my gosh, can it get just like, can the light at the end of the tunnel show up, And sometimes all it takes is somebody to just say, you're doing a great job. Keep going. And if the future you could come, now looking, it's like it was only 60 to 90 days away that it was like things were going to turn the corner. But your husband did that for you and gave you that encouragement.
That's right. I mean, we all need support and we need each other. And, and when there's a big dreams are scary. If you're inspired to take on something big, that's scary. So having a trusted person in your corner to be able to talk to and work through, I've had business coaches and creativity coaches too. And that's such a valuable tool to have in your toolbox as someone to push you forward and share what they know so you can keep going and get over that hurdle. But persistence is the key, though. It's like any big dream or any big creative project, you just have to keep going and make the time for it.
Yes, absolutely. So obviously you're super creative, and people who are listening that aren't writers are probably thinking, oh my gosh, like you came up with the, intro and, and the end of the story before you wrote the middle. They're probably thinking, how in the world did you do that? But I do want to ask you, being, what would you say is like the top, 1, 2, or even 3 things that have helped you become more creative? And are there any pitfalls to being so creative that you find?
Well, so the 3 areas that I think have really helped me mentally and physically be more creative is educating myself, whether that's reading, listening to podcasts, learning from other people. Educating yourself is so important. And I think it keeps you young and it keeps your mind working. And so that's really been something. If I'm interested in something, I read about it. If I'm stopped with my creativity, I seek out, podcasts that talk about how to push through that. And I find them very inspiring. I read books about writing. And then of course, I read nonfiction or fiction books too, which is, kind of expands your mind and makes you think about different ways to tell a story. So educating yourself is really important. I also make a commitment to touch my creative projects every day, whether it's 20 minutes, whether it's an hour, whether it's a half a day. As long as you touch this dream or this special thing or your writing project or even a piece of art, as long as you touch your work every day, it keeps it very alive for you. So even if you're not sitting at your desk working on that particular project, you may be out cleaning the stalls or riding your horse or, driving somewhere. And those ideas still are in your head and very fresh. So things bubble up. And often I won't be working at my desk when ideas will come up, and then I'll scramble to write them all down on, whatever I can find, sticky notes, Post-it notes, my journal. I've even torn out the inside of my horse's feed bags to get a piece of paper.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
I can catch those thoughts. So I think touching it keeps it alive. Touch it every day. That's so important. And then I really believe in quieting the mind. So I practice meditation before I will work on any projects, like just to clear the mind and calm the mind, because if you're thinking about all sorts of different things, you're not able to be present with your creativity or listen to the muse. So I like to follow the muse. Where does the muse want me to go today? And trust that. And then and if you meditate, it kind of quiets the other voices or have-tos that are running through your mind all the time. So those are 3 things that I really truly believe in. And then the pitfall, I would say, of being a creative person, and this kind of goes back to what I shared with you about having a trusted accountability partner or having someone you trust with your creativity, is make sure you share your creative endeavors with people you trust, because we can very easily be impacted by other people's opinions or negative voices or thoughts on what we're doing, or, you can't do that sort of thing. So when you're sharing your creative work, I recommend not ever really sharing it until it's finished, because you can get stopped. And then when you do share it, for the first time especially, make sure it's with someone that you trust. You trust them, you trust their feedback, you trust that they'll be gentle with your creative aspirations and dreams. Because I have had an experience where early on when I was working on my book, I shared it with someone who wasn't the right demographic for my book, someone who had never read a romance novel, who only really liked to read nonfiction. And she set the pages down in her lap and she said, "So when are they going to get it on already?" And for me, that stopped me, and I put it in a drawer, and it was a family member, and that stopped me, and that made me feel like my work wasn't worthy, when in fact, the real truth of the matter is I didn't share my creativity with a trusted person.
With the right person. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That is really good advice. And speaking of, I mean, your 3 areas of focus were fantastic. You and I are a lot alike. I read a lot. My goal this year is 52 books. So working on a book a week, and I couldn't agree with you more. And I think a lot of times also what's interesting with the quieting the mind is that I hear people say all the time, especially and I'm sure you, with your busy life, hear it too, but amongst friends and entrepreneurs, they'll say, there are just not enough hours in the day. And what's so amazing is when you take just, even if it's 30 minutes to quiet and meditate, it's like all of a sudden you have all this newfound time, it just, it's so interesting how that works almost in a, reverse sequence. But those 3 areas that just, that is awesome advice. I love that. Yeah. So I do want to, ask you, because I know I've also listened to your podcast, and I heard you say in there that you try to challenge yourself and write at least 1,000 words a day, which is a lot. And you're obviously always doing a lot of things, and you're building this awesome brand, and writing all these amazing books, and their series also. So there's, that sequential aspect to it. But what do you find is the most important thing in leading yourself every day?
Well, this goes back to touching my work every day. And I believe that there's systems and routines and rituals that work best for each human, like each creative. So what I've found is I develop a routine to prepare myself to get into the writing mindset. So I have, I meditate, which I find clears my mind and then gives me that burst of energy. And then I come into my office and I close the door, and I'm very, very fortunate. Out the windows in front of my desk, I can see my horses, and horses are the inspiration for my books and my writing. So having them out there, I can see them. And then I light a scented candle. I like citrus scents because those also elicit energy and feelings of well-being and creativity. And then I sit down and I write in short bursts. I don't, overwhelm is a big thing for authors, and you only have so much willpower. So I find that writing in short bursts, and then I get up and I take a break and I stretch and I walk around, and then, 5 to 10 minutes later, I sit back down. Maybe I'll get a glass of water, but then I sit back down and I write in another short burst. And those sequential short bursts are what really helps me reach that 1,000-word goal and get my brain in the right frame of mind for writing and creative writing.
Yeah, it's really setting, also, you're really setting the tone. It's like you're creating the environment that, that you want, and that you need to really be successful.
And I like to equate it to with, as horse people, we all know this experience, right? Like there are days where you just feel tired, or you're exhausted, or you just want to lay around on the couch and you don't want to go drive out to the barn if you rode your horse, or you don't feel like tacking up. But then once you do, and you finish spending time with your horse and you have ridden, you're like, why was I resisting this? Like, why did I not want to go out and do this? And, that's a hurdle. And it's the same thing with writing. Like once I'm in my routine and I'm starting the process, like Stephen King says, the scariest moment is always right before you start. And it is so true, because you find resistance, you get nervous. You're like, do I have anything to say? But it's like that horseback ride. If you just saddle up, sit down, get going, the muse always shows up. And I'm like, where is this coming from? I don't know, but I created the situation with which to get the words on the page.
Yes. Yeah. No, I love that. And that is so true. It's like right before you start is always that scariest
Mhm.
moment. I can relate to that as a speaker. It's like I'll be very excited all the time leading up to it, even the moment that I'm, walking there. But it's like as soon as I'm backstage and they call my name, I'm like, oh my gosh. And then once you get out there and you say the first word, it's like all those butterflies start flying in alignment and you're good to go. But that is so true. Right before you start.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let me ask you, I guess, are there any final words of wisdom? You've given us so many good things today, but are there any final words of wisdom that you feel like, for someone who maybe is where, not where they want to be, but, and maybe they're not exactly going to where you are, but they, want to build a presence and they want to build a different life for themselves. Is there any word of wisdom that you would leave our listeners with?
Well, I would say find your community and find support. And, for me, I've learned, other authors are not my competition. When we work together, we're a stronger tribe. So building a community around you of supportive people who are doing what you want to do, who can be guideposts for where you want to go, I think is like, and then that kind of goes back to educating yourself. Learn from people who are walking, a step ahead of you, and find those communities. There's organizations, there's Facebook groups, there's wonderful coaches in the world. There's writing groups. Get involved in the writing community if you're an author, or get involved in the creative community that appeals to you, or even, the equestrian community, and find those like people, because you're going to find inspiration, you're going to find motivation, you're going to find support, which we all need in our creative endeavors and dreams. So go where your people are, find your tribe.
That is great. Yeah. Yeah. And they will find accountability. Yeah, that's a great advice. So how can people find you and benefit from what you're doing and join your mission?
Well, people can visit me on my website at carlykadecreative.com. That's Kade. And then I'm in all the usual places. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, and Twitter. And then tune in to the Equestrian Author Spotlight. There's a new episode every Wednesday, and I interview other authors of horse books, and they share a little bit of background about the horses in their lives, how they get their writing projects done, how they market their books. So basically I believe in authors uniting, and that's sort of my mission. And that's why I created the podcast. So if you're interested in writing a book, this is a great resource for you to educate yourself.
Fantastic. Awesome, Carly. Well, congratulations on being an Amazon top bestseller. That is fantastic, and everything you've achieved. And this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, thank you so much for the invitation, Kat. I've so enjoyed speaking with you today.
Super. All right. Thanks, Carly. Take care. Thank you for listening to Parables, Life Lessons from a Horse, with me, Kat Chrysostom, as your host. If you enjoyed our show and want to learn more, check out benefabproducts.com or subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher. Don't forget to join us next week when we'll discuss another important life lesson. And until then, be well and take care.